Chapter 2. Enter the Milesians. And now the port of Isthmia was very busy. For several weeks now, hundreds of sailing ships, barges, and larger and smaller galleys had been arriving every day. Crowds of visitors from all over Greece flocked on the coast and the great road leading to Corinth. The Isthmian Games were about to commence, and Corinth teemed with competitors and spectators, and still more people arrived every day in the great city between the seas. Like seabirds following a shoal of fish, merchants rush from the farthest shores to take advantage of this great gathering of humanity. Among the native Hellenes, it was easy to spot the unfamiliar features of beautifully dressed Phoenicians, volatile Etruscans, bronze-skinned Egyptians, Lydians from Asia Minor, Thracians and Syrians. How many colours, how many countries, how many different garments, headdresses, hairstyles, jewels. Eyes hurt from looking, ears from listening to those thousands of voices. Diossos walked among the crowds, constantly jostled from all sides, looking, listening, but not enjoying it. His eyes remained sad. How could he rejoice when all his work had been in vain for 10 days straight? He had come to the port every day, trying to lure a visitor to stay at their house, and nothing. Following the example of other Corinthians, the Carians, in anticipation of the crowds, had prepared their rooms to receive visitors. They cleared one room in their house and built a table and a bench, and brought straw to make a mat. These were small expenses for some, but big expenses for them. Yet they incurred them, hoping a foreigner coming for a longer stay would pay enough rent to cover all costs, and bring maybe a dozen drachmas in profits. And these drachmas, by Zeus, how they needed them! Diossos knew it well, and so he stood patiently in the port for hours, and ran up to every sailing ship and galley as it arrived. All in vain. There were always other people there already, most of them adults, loud and strong. They pushed him aside, shouted and laughed, joking with the visitors more smoothly than he ever could. And what could he do? Those people invited travellers to their places in Skoinunt or Corinth, or some nice coastal resort. And he was alone and small, and the room he offered was in a ramshackle house right at the port. And so he returned empty-handed to their little house, where his mother and his sister awaited him, ever more melancholy and sad. And it was all because of him, because of his indolence, helplessness, and stupidity. And today, or at the latest tomorrow, was his last chance to find a paying guest, because then the games would begin, and no more arrivals could be expected. Diossos did not even want to think about showing up at home empty-handed. His sister would reproach him. Naturally. Tears welled up in his eyes. He loved his sister, the 15-year-old Euclea. He considered her the most beautiful girl in the whole of Corinth, and was perhaps not wholly wrong. Euclea had that same unusual beauty as Diossos, only her hair was even darker, her complexion whiter, and her features even more delicate. Taller than her brother, she was as slender and lithe as he, and her eyes were similar, deep, dark, curious and sad. For Diossos, she was the prettiest and the wisest, the bravest and all around the best. He never changed his mind, even when he got a boxing from her. He accepted it philosophically, understanding that his sister was his mother's deputy. Besides, his sister rarely hit him, and caressed him a lot more often. And Diossos could always take comfort in the fact that he had an even younger brother, an 8-year-old, who, in turn, had to listen to him and obey him, and whom he also caressed, only not as often, and whom he could also hit, only much more often. But now everyone, mother, sister, and brother, expected him to deliver, and he hadn't been able to. Nothing, all day nothing. In the late afternoon, he saw a small, beautiful sailboat pull up between two larger ships moored by the shore, and he rushed toward it. But he had little hope. In fact, he didn't have any, naturally. Already some other boys were there, 15 or 16-year-old striplings. They had beaten him to it, and were already talking to the newcomers. Diossos tried in vain to push his way forward, to say something, but no one paid attention to him, and the teenagers were already leading the arrivals away. But then, suddenly, they quarrelled among themselves, and two began fighting, and the newcomers turned to Diossos. A very tall, slim young man with pale golden hair took him by the arm. "Do you have a place to stay, little fellow?" he asked. "I do," Diossos replied quickly. "Take us, then." Diossos did not want to believe his luck. He led the way. Someone shouted, "Where are you distinguished gentlemen going? To these foreign paupers? They don't even have a stool to sit on. They are bag people." The tall man turned his gentle eyes on Diossos. "Is that true, boy?" Diossos's eyes welled up with tears. He dared not answer either yes nor no. He only said, "It's very close, good sir," and pointed to the nearby cottage. "Let's take a look," decided the other visitor, also young but stocky and broad-shouldered. And they went along. Diossos's heart trembled. Of course, the visitors would see that there was nothing there, only bare walls, 2 stools and a straw mat. And they would go away. It's not like he could magic the house into a palace. When they entered the tiny yard, he didn't dare look the splendid travellers in the eyes. But there was his sister on the threshold. Seeing the strangers, she froze in place, staring at them with amazed, frightened eyes. The visitors also stood motionless for a long time without saying a word. They entered and looked around the room. Diossos slipped in behind them. The startled Euclea explained the bathroom, the meals, the way to the games, then quickly scampered to the other room, like a modest Greek girl should. It was not fitting for a young girl to talk to strangers without witnesses and without veiling her face. And they were such young and beautiful men. The newcomers conferred with each other in an undertone. The short, dark-haired man with lively eyes wanted to look for another room. "There is really nothing here, Polynikos," he said. "It's as basic as it gets." But the latter, Polynikos, objected. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Why?" "Because, did you see that girl, Melocles?" Melocles laughed uproariously, and the tall, thin man continued in a whisper, "By all the gods, I have never seen such a prettier girl in my life." "And Anethi?" "Bah, Anethi. Anethi doesn't count. She's my sister." They discussed something in whispers, but the decision had already been made. They would stay. That day, Diossos had a mountain of work. He had to run to the sailboat a score of times to bring various bags, packages, crates, vessels, pitchers, coats, food. Apart from the 2 young visitors, there was another man on the ship, an old sailor, squinting and grouchy, and a young boy, a servant. By evening, Diossos knew everything. The name of the boat was Anethi. She belonged to the younger, shorter man, who nevertheless seemed the most important of them all. The taller man was his brother-in-law, his wife's brother, and a friend, and the third man, the old fellow, was a steersman on the boat. He knew that they had come all the way from Miletus in Ionia, in Asia Minor, and that this slim, tall man, whose name was Polynikos, was to stand in the games as a competitor, as a long-distance runner. Diossos looked at him with admiration. Thanks to him, and only to him, the visitors had noticed Diossos in the first place, and then came to the house and decided to take the room. Diossos heard it clearly when Polynikos called his sister the most beautiful girl in the world, and his heart filled with pride and gratitude to the newcomer for saying this. He was not abashed by this tall man. Indeed, Polynikos could not cause fear in anyone. Gentle, with a childish face, a delicate, shy smile, golden hair, and bright blue eyes, he always seemed cheerful and a little shy. Who could fear him? And at the same time, he was an athlete, a competitor in the Isthmian Games, chosen from among thousands, perhaps even a future champion. And Polynikos, seeing the delight and trust in the boy's face, smiled at him and talked to him as if they were equals. The boy's adoration amused him, and his extraordinary beauty touched him, and he wanted to learn something about his beautiful sister, Euclea. At supper time, Polynikos sat Diossos down on the bench beside him, and made him eat and drink along with them. Diossos, who had not yet learned the taste of wine, white bread, or smoked fish, could not get enough of their fare. He grew familiar with his elder companion, and when questioned, he began to talk about all his worries, troubles, poverty, his wicked stepfather who took everything from the house to sell, and his flute. Hearing those confessions from the other room, Euclea summoned Diossos and sternly rebuked him for telling strangers such things. "He is not a stranger," the boy said, surprised. "I already know him well, and I like him. And you should like him too," he added after a moment. "Why?" "Because he is good and great, and he is a competitor in the games, and because he likes you. I heard him say to the other fellow, the black-haired one, that you are the most beautiful girl he has ever seen. He said it really, really quietly, but I heard it anyway. See?" The girl said nothing to that, but she blushed scarlet red and turned away quickly. When, some time later, she had to go out to the guests to pour wine for them, a veil covered her face, hiding her blush of embarrassment, confusion, and anxiety. Fortunately, her mother's arrival saved her from the trouble of ministering to the two strangers any longer. The mother sent Diossos out of the room, but the boy snuck back in on some excuse. He could not give up such an opportunity to look at real sailors and real competitors and listen to their conversation. But the day, though already so good for the Carians, brought another important and welcome event. As they sat there dining, there was a sudden commotion at the front door. Diossos went outside. A big, fat, richly dressed man stood there, and with him was a teenage boy and a huge Thracian slave carrying a heavy basket. "Is the worthy Melicles of Miletus staying here?" the newcomer asked in an imperious voice. Diossos went numb. So, these Miletus sailors were dignitaries. Oh, Zeus! Without waiting for an answer, the newcomer pushed Diossos aside and went in, filling the whole door with his ample frame. The young men sprang to their feet at the sight, and the smaller, Melicles, shouted for joy and threw himself into the fat man's open arms. "Callias! Callias, how did you come here? How did you find us?" The fat, powerful visitor was also clearly pleased. He gasped with satisfaction as he examined the young men, and slapped Melicles hard on the shoulder. "Well, well, so you're married, my boy?" "Yes, I'm married." "With that, what's her name, his sister, Diomedes' daughter, Anethi, yes?" Melicles smiled. "Yes, with her. And now we have a son. He can walk already. No, he runs." "Splendid!" Callias laughed out loud. "He'll grow up to be a sport like his father, you'll see. It's a good thing that you married, my boy, because marriage makes man serious and dignified in the eyes of others, and that is the most important thing in trade. A big, serious merchant like me could not consort with some inconsequential whelp. But with a father and head of a family, that's a different story. Now we can drink together as equals." Melicles started pouring wine, and Callias, spreading himself on a stool, looked around. "Couldn't you find a better place to stay than this hovel?" he asked. Melicles shrugged. "Polynikos insisted on staying here." "Why? This is a dive." "That is exactly why. Polynikos said we would disappoint and shame the host if we left. He's a lamb, you know." "And what do you care about the hosts?" Nothing about the hosts, Callias. But they have a daughter, and she's pretty." Callias laughed uproariously. "Well then, that's different, Polynikos. I didn't realize you were such a connoisseur." "Polynikos, my friend, here is my principal worry. Polynikos has such a good heart that when he dashes ahead in the race, he will probably start feeling bad about his competitors, stop and give them time to catch up." Callias turned curiously to Polynikos. "You are in the games, Polynikos? In pancration?" "The long-distance run." "Apollo's liar. Your legs are long enough. They start at your neck and go all the way to the ground. But this is an honour, a great honour to compete." Polynikos suddenly gained respect in his eyes. "I mean, seriously, every competitor is a winner already. There's glory in merely participating. This thing here in Corinth is not the Olympic Games of Elias, but these are right and famous games, not bad at all. And a celery wreath is every inch as glorious as the laurel wreath. Why haven't you come earlier, though? You could have used a longer workout in the gymnasium and familiarised yourself with the venue and your competitors. You know, to see their strengths and strategies." But Melicles went back to his first question. "We arrived only at noon today. How did you find us so quickly?" Callias shrugged. "There was no art to it. I came to the port with my man to buy a box of spices directly from a ship, and maybe some Cypriot wine. And I see this very nice little sailboat there, and she sure looks familiar. I think to myself, I recognise that mast. And on its side it says, for all to see, Anethi. So, Anethi, I say to myself. There is a name one does not hear every day. And so I ask, whose boat is this? And they say, Melicles of Miletus. I see, I say. So, where is he then? And they point out this hole in the wall to me. And here I am. That's all. In truth, you should be the ones calling on me, because I am as old as the two of you combined. But I don't stand on ceremony." "Have you a slave?" asked Polynikos. "Yes, my friend, and even a few," said Callias with an owner's pride. "Well, to tell the truth, it isn't me who owns them, but our company. Because, you see, I am now a co-owner of the ship. I bet, by the way, no boat as beautiful as mine has ever been seen in Corinth. Even in Syracuse you won't find its equal." "And are you here often?" "Several times a year. It's become my second home. It's a beautiful city, just beautiful. Only there is a huge mass of cheats here, so you have to look out." Here Melicles suddenly grew serious and said, "It must be strange to have slaves in the house. You know, I don't know that I ever could have any. I would never want to see their eyes looking at me with envy. Think about it, Callias. I was a slave myself for a year before you bought me out." Callias pouted impatiently. "Nonsense," he said. "My slaves are barbarians, not Greeks. And besides, they are doing well in my service. They're well fed, and their skin glows on them like a dog's nostril." Polynikos shook his head. "But they always feel their misery." "What misery? Who is hurting them? I do not bully my slaves because it is stupid to do so. If your slaves aren't happy, well, you know, they serve you your food and are often awake when you are asleep. You are literally trusting them with your life when you take them into your house. So, if you know what is good for you, you better keep your slaves happy. But there are all sorts. There are all these people who are mean to their slaves because that makes them feel superior. That's just dumb. My Thracian is a case in point. Listen to this story. So, I'm staying here with this merchant, Antinous, in Corinth, a well-known merchant and one hell of a fraudster. Naturally, he has ripped me off big time, charging me for each day of stay and each and every service. My, may the good god Hermes remember. But I endured it all because I needed his contacts. For the time being, of course. Well, this Antinous had a cook, a slave, a Thracian. The scoundrel is as ugly as a monkey, tattooed up to his eyeballs, and has a rotten attitude. But in the kitchen, he is a poet. He cooks so well that his dinners would not shame the Babylonian court. Believe me, no one knows these things better than I do. But this Antinous does not understand what a treasure he's got, and he beats his man for the slightest thing, beats him, and he forbids him to eat his own cooking. Imagine, his cook is not allowed to eat what he cooks. My dog is better off, Melicles, my dog, I say. So, I think to myself, it would be really nice to have such a cook on my ship, and at home, too, when I am back in Syracuse. If I can have this fellow, well, then I can receive people as they should be received. So, I offer Antinous good value for him, 60 drachmas. And Antinous laughs at that. 120 drachmas, he says, or nothing. Wait, I think to myself, you just wait. Not a peep about that cook any more. But I called my slaves, the fellows on my ship, and I sent them to do some work on Antinous. I tell them, talk to this cook in your own way. Tell him how it is with me, honestly." They chatted. So, then I talk to this cook. I tell him, "Would you like to come into my service?" And he folds his hands in prayer to buy him. So I say to him, "I cannot redeem you from your owner because he's asking too much money. But maybe we can figure this out." We talked, but nothing yet. Quiet. 1 week passes, 2 weeks, and guess what happens? Our friend, the cook, becomes ill. His eyes grow teary. He can't see very well. He's losing weight. He doesn't want to eat. And then the crowning moment. He begins to spit blood. Not good. 3 days later, Antinous comes to me and asks, by the way of something else, totally offhand, do I still want his cook? You get it, right? A sick slave. A fellow standing over his grave, spitting blood. That miscreant, that crook. I mean, Antinous, that is. So, I say, I'm a little short of cash, but I can give you 50 drachmas for the man. He jumps up. You were offering 60 only 5 weeks ago. Yes, I say, but that was then, and now is now. I can see your man looks poorly, thin and pale. Maybe he is sick or something. Maybe if I eat his food I catch something. I will not give more. We bargained for a long time, but I persisted and bought him for 50 drachmas. And now I have him. That's the giant standing there in the backyard. But if he's that sick, Callias laughed. He, as soon as he came on my ship, he sat down and ate so much that I was afraid he would burst. He was really famished after those 3 weeks of starvation. And the blood? What about the spitting of blood? Ha! That was the masterstroke. Is there ever a shortage of blood in the kitchen? You kill a chicken and you have blood. How hard is it to spit that? The fellow is as healthy as a fish, happy, glad to be in my service. No whipping, eats whatever he wants, as much as he wants. My dinners are fantastic, and the crew can't have enough of his stuff. I'm telling you, he's a jewel, not a cook. And that for 50 drachmas. And besides, it's easy to like him. He's a cheerful, clever rascal, and, it turns out, worth a far better fate than serving a wretch like Antinous. General laughter erupted. Callias continued. You must come to me for a feast. The day after tomorrow. Come on the ship, because now I live there. You'll see how I live. I live like a king. Why on earth should I stay with Antinous when he can't even serve me a proper supper? There is no decent cook in his house. So, my friends, are you coming? I will come for sure, said Melocles, but I do not know if Polynikos can. Polynikos shook his head. No, I will not be allowed to, he replied. From tomorrow on, I must be in the gymnasium with other competitors. We will be required to remain on the hallowed ground and not allowed to go out. The games will start in 3 days. Why do you only come now? It's all because of him, said Melocles, pointing to Polynikos. The man is more than 20, but bashful as a child. There were qualifying trials in Miletus for a month. I tell him, Go, try out, you run well. To which he says, They are much better than me. And he kept delaying. At last, He agreed to stand only on the last day during final selections. He stood immediately with the fastest group. They did not want to let him in at first. They laughed at him. I was there. Polynikos was red with shame and anger, but he insisted. And imagine, he came first by 20 paces. What distance? Long race, 16 stadions. Ha! 20 paces. By the fast-legged Achilles, they must have felt stupid. Of course, they insisted on rerunning the race. So he beat them again, even better this time. Then they realised what treasure they had and decided to send him right away. Well then, we'll see you at the stadium, and may Zeus help you, and Hermes, God's light-footed messenger. Just hold on tight, my boy, and train hard. Not just anybody's here, you know. Probably the best is Cleomenes the Athenian, an incomparable runner. He's taken laurels at 2 Olympiads in a row. 2 Olympiads running, so to speak. Yes, I've heard. In a race against him, I would be proud to come in second. Oh, yes, and even that itself would be great glory. Besides, this is your first time, so you cannot reasonably expect to do more. It is a great honour already to be sent by Miletus. Anyway, you will come to me right after the competition, yes? We will come for sure. Well then, and now to the health of the future winner. And then he threw his arm around Polynikos' neck. Polynikos, he said, you are a fine fellow, and I am sure that you will win. I knew very little of your father, but I knew your uncle, Philemon, in Memphis, and, by all gods, he was one worthy man. And what a merchant! Do you remember Melocles? Yes, Philemon was a right proper merchant. Not like the crooks you find here in Corinth. Antinous, for example, price-fixer, trickster, and a fool. Callias blushed and slammed his fist on the table. A fool, I say. He lost such a cook, and for almost nothing, for 50 drachmas. And all he had to do was be nice to his man. And he's supposed to be a merchant. It's shameful to even think about it. Callias pondered, resting his heavy head on his hands. Yes, he whispered, still softer. Terrible cheats here in this Corinth. Terrible. At midnight, Polynikos carried the sleeping Diossos to the adjoining room and handed him to his mother.